Quarterback Will Finch's retirement with a year left on his clock punctuated, highlighted, and underlined the season of transition 2016 will be for the Western Mustangs. We caught up with head coach Greg Marshall on Monday and talked about the challenge of change.
It's very difficult, Jim. And I think one of the things is that when Will came out of high school, he was one of the most highly recruited student athletes to come out in a long time. So everyone knew Will Finch, and all the quarterbacks know of him. And so not easy for us to recruit another quarterback when Will was in first, second, even in third year. We were fortunate that with Stevenson Bone, he came. His dad was a coach here, and he wanted to come here. And we didn't, actively recruit him. He wanted to come here because his dad was coaching. So we're fortunate to get Stevenson. We had another quarterback, Josh Beach, who's graduating, who was in the mix last year. He basically was a receiver, and we turned him into a quarterback because it was not easy recruiting behind Will Finch. And, I think that last year was different. Last year we brought in, several good young quarterbacks, thinking that, they had a couple years to develop before Will graduated. But with Will graduating now and deciding not to play, those players are going to, be forced to step up a lot earlier.
But for that group of young quarterbacks behind Stevenson Bone, they must be energized by having the calendar of opportunity moved up by a year. What's the response around there? They must be watching video, and they must be really active around the program.
Absolutely. I think that when and we've known for a while. I talked to Will about his decision back before Christmas, and we said to give it some time. But I think a lot of players in our team knew that this was happening, and the young players are out throwing over at the arena, on the track, anywhere. We don't have the nice weather like you do out there, so we have to find bits and pieces and hallways to throw the football, but they're making do and getting out there as best they can. And I think that's one thing about university football, especially in Canada, is that football is such a quarterback-driven sport that the quarterback, great team game, and we all know that football is a team game, but that quarterback position is so important. And there's always that in university football, that change where you have their guy, you have a Michael Faulds or a Will Finch, and then they graduate, and then you have to kind of recover. And I think we've done a pretty good job over the last few years kind of evening out that transition. The year that Michael graduated and Donnie came in and played, we won the Yates Cup, and that was in 2010. When Donnie graduated after 2012, we won the Yates Cup in 2013 with a young quarterback in Will Finch. So I think leaning on the run game is going to be important, and certainly leaning on our defense and special teams.
But it's not just losing Finch. You are really in the vortex of change this year, aren't you?
Well, if you're at our football banquet a couple weeks ago, we gave out a lot of graduating player awards. This is a big year for us. We graduate a lot of fifth-year players. And if you look at the CFL Combine, I don't think there's a team that probably has more players going to the National and Regional Combine than we do. I think we have 6 or 7 going to the National Combine, and I believe 8 or 9 going to the Regional Combine. So the CFL is certainly taking a hard look at some of our fourth-year players. So that's one of those things you don't know about. You don't know who will come back from the CFL camp, or who might get drafted and who doesn't. So you need to make plans and make sure that we recruit around that. I will say this: last year we had a very, very good recruiting class, and the group of young student athletes that came in last year did very well for us last season.
Now, you mentioned recruiting. We had Blake Nillen here a few weeks ago, and he made a big push for Jonathan Kongbo, the big D lineman who was from BC, and he was the top JUCO player, period, in 2015. But Blake felt it was important to make a push for the best available kid in his own backyard, and Kongbo's now in Tennessee. How important is it that you go after the best player, in your opinion, out of your own backyard, even if you've only got a single-digit percentage chance of getting that recruit? Or is it a case of saving energy because there's only so many hours in a day and so much resources? I suppose that repat player plays into that now, too, because he can come back without a red shirt. So what is it? Do you go after the big fish, or do you focus your resources?
That's a good question, Jim, and it's not an easy one. And I would say that, for as much time as I've been recruiting, I can't say there's a definitive, answer, a definitive pattern. And the one thing I will say is, take for example an Eddie Meredith, who we recruited very, very strongly coming out of St. Andrews College. We knew he had Division I interest. He went to Boston College, spent 2 years there. It didn't work out for him there, and he decided to come back. And when he came back, he looked at the schools that were actively recruiting him when he came out of high school, and he elected to come here. So I think there's that too, that you never know. You never know when a student athlete may come back. I'm kind of the opinion that recruit the best. And we certainly have been out there trying to do that this year. There's some athletes that are right up front with you right away that they're not interested in coming, at least coming to Western or coming to Ontario, or maybe coming to a Canadian school. And I think that that's important. The one thing we say in recruiting that we want athletes to be honest with us. Are they interested in coming, or are they not interested in coming, and give us an answer either way.
Canada Football Chat has at least one well-researched guide out there, and at this stage we usually have around 3 or 4 of the top recruits out of the top 10 landed at CIS schools by now. That doesn't seem to be the case this year. With the poll of stateside academies who take kids out of high school and out of the Canadian system, they cut off a line of communication. How much more difficult is that for you as a recruiter when you're working against D1 schools?
Well, the academies definitely have an influence on players, and I think that more and more student athletes, when they are in grade 10 or 11, or even maybe in 12 and going into grade 12, will look to go to some type of an academy or prep school, hoping that they get a Division I offer. I will say this, that we're always going to lose some of the best players to some of the Division I schools. And you look at every year, last year, the year before, 15, 20 players that we lose. And you look at the CFL draft, because every year the CFL drafts the best Canadian players. And if you look traditionally at the first 2-3 rounds, they're usually made up of CIS players. So there is something to be said for going to school and playing. And if you get a Division I scholarship to a very good academic school, I would encourage you to go. Because at the end of the day, and especially in the sport of football, the education is most important.
Okay, we're going to get into one polarizing issue that always comes up. It's an old war horse with CIS sport. And Greg, I promised you that I would not get you into trouble this interview, but I have to ask you this one. We know that there's money outside of these programs that want to make a difference for student athletes, and we know that we even have issues inside our own borders with an equal playing field, but with the inability to compete on an equal footing for players in some cases with the NCAA, should the CIS at some point consider full ride scholarships?
Jim, if I thought that would make a difference, then I would be supportive of it. I think one of the issues that we have right now in CIS football is the disparity amongst the teams that are already playing. And right now in Ontario, we can't give out full tuition scholarships as they can in Quebec and the Maritimes and in Canada West. We're maxed out at a $4,500 athletic award to incoming students that have to have an 80% average. So one of the things that I would say is, yes, we can increase it, but we need to make sure that the Ontario is on, at a par with the other schools that we're recruiting against. So when we recruit against Calgary or UBC or Concordia, that we can offer the same that all those other schools are. So one of the things we need to do, make sure that we have parity across the divisions, because we are all competing for a national championship. The other thing too is it's important that we don't move too far ahead of some of the other schools, because that's one of the issues that we have right now. And that disparity in teams. We have 27 teams playing that all have significantly different budgets and what they're trying to operate with.
Now, speaking of parity, the OUA, for anyone who's followed it over the years, they've seen a 3-tier league. The elite, the middle, and the also-rans. And that's been a real problem, as we know, over the last 10 years or so. But there are some signs that this is slowly turning the corner. You have Chris Bertoya in Waterloo, who is with you at UWO, and he has the support of the school. And in York, Warren Craney has great new facilities to work with, thanks to the Pan Am Games. He's got some extra support as well. So do you believe the bottom three in the OUA are finally closing the gap?
Yes, I do. And I think that resources are part of success. I mean, you have to have money for scholarships. You have to have money to do recruiting. You have to have a budget to be able to compete. But I think one of the other things is leadership. And if you look at the schools like Waterloo and York, outstanding leadership right now, and leadership with coaches, and not just the head coaches, but their staffs that they're putting together that have a desire to win. And I can see that those programs, just in our conference, will make big strides over the next few years because of the work ethic in their coaching staffs and the people that they have. So it's getting better, in Ontario, and I that's where we compete against. I can look at across our conference and say it's getting better. Some of the teams that have been traditionally weak are doing the right thing and are committed to football. And Waterloo and York are definitely committed to football.
So resources, what's the right mix for funding a program? Can it be all private? Can it be all on the school? And can there still be success? Is there a role for sponsorship? And can you make this a one-size-fits-all model, or is it a case-by-case basis with 27 teams across the country with different agendas? What is the right mix?
It is a case-by-case basis, but I think that there has to be funding in place from the school. That the school has to have that base funding model and make sure that they think football is important. If you're always just looking to generate sponsorship dollars or income from alumni and fundraising, that changes every single year. I will say that our budget at Western is getting closer to 50-50. That half of our budget is raised externally from the university through fundraising on our alumni and other fundraising events that we put on. And I think more and more schools in Canada are doing that, but there still has to be that significant investment by the university, I believe, in order for schools to be competitive.
The proposed 8-team national playoff. A lot of talk about this as a possible option. There's 2 regions against this with the Can West and the AUS coaches I've talked to. It's a great deal for you guys in Ontario, and I think that says just how difficult it is on a national platform to get an agreement on anything. I think you and I both know that. What's your position on this?
I think it's a good idea. I think we would have liked it last year and the year before. It's always difficult. I think there's a couple things you have to look at. One is that you don't want it to take away from the conference championship, and it's going to impact the conference championship. And those are big games. They create interest. They're usually big draws. But I do think that Canada is comes from a playoff culture, that more playoff games would create more interest. And one of the issues that we have in a big country like Canada is that we just don't get a chance to play the University of Calgary very often, or or Laval or St. FX or UBC. Creating those opportunities to bring other opponents onto our campus to play a meaningful game, I think has value.
Well, we've talked about some of the challenges already, but what's the biggest challenge in 2016 for CIS football in your mind?
Well, I think it's the disparity amongst the teams that are playing right now, and that it is being addressed, that the schools are taking that step to be competitive, certainly in Ontario. And I think one of the things that we've looked at and that we've been dealing with for the last 2 or 3 years is the recruiting challenges. And in order to make it fair for all schools to have an opportunity to recruit, we have to make sure that there's a set of guidelines to govern recruiting. And not that we didn't have those before, they just needed to be updated. And, we had a committee. I was on it with Coach Constantine and Coach Nill and Coach Jeffries and Coach Samara. We've vetted it through a big leadership meeting we had last year in Ottawa, where we had all the athletic directors, all the football coaches from across the country looking at this new recruiting package. So it looks, it's. I believe now that the CIS is buying into it. We've agreed to it. They've signed off on it. The CIS is looking at putting something in place like a clearinghouse that student athletes would limit the number of official visits and somehow try to control the costs so that all the schools across the country can compete effectively.
Yeah, but it's great to have a policy and guidelines and have a gentleman's agreement, but you mentioned the vastness of this country. How do you enforce it, and whose responsibility is it? Is it the responsibility of the CIS head office, or is it the conferences who deal with the logistics on a day in and day out basis?
I think it resides with both. And I think that to start out, you need to fund at least a full-time position right now to look at compliance. And if that means that all 27 schools paying some type of fee in order to fund that position, or if there's a fee for the clearinghouse that for a student athlete to sign up and to be recruited like there is in the US, that fee would go to support a position or positions within the CIS or within those conferences. I think it has to be done. And I mean, a gentleman's agreement and a handshake will only work for so long. That we have good rules in place now. We need to find a way to have them enforced and to make sure that all the schools are compliant. And I think the CIS, and I know that Steve Samara is our president of CUFCA, and he's been working with the new president-elect of the CIS, Graham Brown, and they're working towards a solution.
Greg, as always, thanks for joining us. Appreciate the time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.